Okay, I think I have chapter 50 ready to put up. It's like all the chapters, it might still be tweaked and worked on, but I think it's ready enough for you know, to go. For people who want to know how the story continues, it is not the last chapter, it's the second to the last chapter. I didn't want this to become super long. It's been so long since I posted chapter 49, not everybody might even remember what happened before chapter 50. There was a big battle between Galen and Avalar and Malian, and Avalar threw Galen at Malian because Galen saw that Malian was using the blazing stone. He was focusing his power directly through the blazing stone, trying to bring Mount Chestnut down. And so Galen had Avalar throw him at Malian. Basically, Galen went through or passed through Malian to knock the stone loose. And then Malian gets snatched or snared by the black stones, the natural stones in the cave, and drained of his power, and ultimately he's killed. So that is how chapter 49 ends, and Galen is writhing in pain. He's been badly burned. So now I am going to attempt to read, it's been so long I'm even out of practice now, attempt to read chapter 50. So here you go. Song of Mornius, chapter 50. Galen fought to scream again. Unguided by his tongue, it was a formless, guttural sound. He pressed against the rock, his jerking body desperate for coolness, any relief from the unending fire consuming him. "Pony!" Avalar shouted. "Help us!" Galen glimpsed the giant hovering close, her face dripping tears as she showed him her handful of lime-colored mushrooms like the ones he'd seen growing in the mine's outer tunnels. Tightly she squeezed her fingers, and a brownish liquid trickled from the side of her palm, dripping into his mouth. "Swallow, Galen," she said softly. "Please." He did so with difficulty, tasting nothing. Avalar moved her arm, and he felt Mornius's skystone press against his palm. Control was greater by direct contact with flesh, method men had said. He shook his head, despairing in his heart as he met the giant's blue gaze. Magic required nerves, and his was flayed from his bones. Against his shapeless hand, the skystone pulsed in vain, freed of the confines of Mornius now destroyed. Yet somehow it seemed far away in another world. Pain and riding the currents of its sizzling hot agony was all he knew. Crystal tinkled beside his head as Avalar started where she crouched, stumbling hastily erect. Through a descending, drowsy haze he saw her big feet stepping back, heard the giant's anguished voice speaking above his head. Then white, furry boots parted the smear of his vision. He saw knees descend to replace them, a bright swirling of feathery wings. Fingers splayed above his head. He saw Pony's face, frowning and out of focus, wavering behind them. "You did well, Galen." The elf mage spoke gently, and Galen felt a crackling against his flesh, a pulsing current from Pony's two palms examining him. "Yet many here are hurt, not just you. They require healing, the kind only Halram can give." "I gave him this," Avalar said. Galen watched as she opened her hand to reveal the crushed and drained mushrooms. "Something I remembered. Collect the caps, not the stems, though I know not why, mayhap for sleep?" "Good giant." Galen saw Pony looking up, saw the pulse throb softly under the pale skin of his neck. "Your mother, Alacia, was a healer," he told her. "Perhaps it is her memory you recall." Pony paused. "For sleep you would need more," he added, eyeing her handful. "That much may ease him, though. Here." Pony shifted back to give her room. Remove his clothing. He cannot heal while it's fused to his flesh. Clothing? Balanced on her heels, Avalar hunkered close, and Galen flinched at the thought of being touched by her huge hands. Bewildered, she reached out, gestured. What clothing? Where? Look closer, giant, Pony urged. Fabric contains thread, while flesh does not. Stiffly the elf stood. Through the haze of his vision, Galen saw him move quietly down the stone. The river was settling with sideways sloshes of water between its banks, Galen noticed. Its thunder, its need to cushion Avalar's lethal fall from above, faded fast. Raising one hand above the water, his palm turned downward, Pony closed his eyes. He thrust out his free arm, pointing fingers at Galen, who sobbed in relief as a cooling rain washed over him. Eyes closed, Pony nodded his head. Hurry, giant, he said. Fingers tugged at him gently, and Galen saw strands and tatters of bloody fabric pulling away. Despite the cool water sluicing over his flesh, he shook with pain and shock. With all his might, he bit down his cries. Above his head, he heard Avalar swallow. Think I got it all. There is still pain, Pony said. Galen saw the elf crouching beside the river, clenching in his hands a brilliant white gem, a paler twin of Mornius' skystone. More coolness fanned his body, only now he caught glimpses in his mind of a frigid black nothing spangled with lights. This ice came from beyond the living sky, straight from the dwelling place of stars. Blissfully numb, he sucked in a deep breath. Avalar! The hoarse, frantic call came high above their heads. Galen sensed rather than saw when Avalar hastened away to peer upward. He heard the relief flooding her voice. Leader Tarek! Pony raised his head. He lives, he said after a pause. Good, we need him. Hurriedly, the elf jerked to his feet. Don't stop, Galen wanted to say, but his mouth was empty, his lips and tongue gone. Instead, he raised a twisted claw of a hand in protest toward the elf. Pony leaned down. Only for a moment, he said gently, and Galen found himself lost in his violet regard. Galen, I must bring them down here. I could make you sleep to spare you this, but I fear you are too injured. Galen nodded. Teeth gritted, he felt pain clench him again, lashing through him. All his life he had known hurt in some form, yet had endured it, felt even he deserved it. He sensed when Pony drew away, felt the abandonment flail at his heart. There came the rushing sound of wings as the elf went aloft. Dreamily Galen glimpsed Pony rising, a single white feather spinning lazily down in the dust-spangled shaft of light. He saw the giant beside him staring upward after the elf, hand shielding her eyes from the bright wedge of sky far above. It is enough. He felt Horum thinking deep inside him. You have served me well, Galen Laval. Here, at the end, you did not deserve this torment. Galen nodded. There would be healing now, the mending of flesh as he found at last purpose and power and health. He lay with his cheek cradled upon the stone, his ruined hands bloody bundles of bone curled alongside his neck. He sensed other hurts besides his own, the wounds of the granite beneath him, the mountain bereft of so much life. With a sigh, Galen pushed his percipience away from himself, plunged it down into the mountain's very heart. Within its craggy cracks his awareness found the blazonstone, pulsing its crimson ire, burning deeply at the flank of the magic-gutted peak. With a flicker of thought, Horum purified the stone, washed away all traces of Malian from its crystalline layers. It lacks will, a mind of its own, Galen heard Horum explain within himself. It cannot resist like you can, and do. There is no victory here, Horam continued. No healing either, until you can forgive yourself. All this ill you harbor inside, wash it away. Leave it behind, Galen. Your life cannot thrive where there is so much despair. Galen moaned softly, feeling the warder embracing his hidden, deepest hurts, all the shame and self-loathing he kept private. Release it, Horam ordered. Galen drew a shaky breath, then nodded. He moved his right hand to bump against the skystone, drawing a smear of his blood across the granite where he lay. For a long moment he listened to the water, the gurgling rush of its life between the rocks. He imagined himself swept along in that current, washing free and unfettered through the endless layer of mountain, bestowing with the gentlest nudges the warmth of healing and new purpose, bringing stilled, cold hearts to life again, warped lives to wholeness and health. Blue light soothed the stinging of his lidless eyes, rippled coolness over his flesh in surges like the breakers of the tide. He sensed the spread of its calm reach across the cavern, filling it, felt it easing into the gaping cracks of Mount Chestnut's shattered heart. Time lost meaning. Somewhere along the way he came to know that Horam was right. He could be what he wanted, strong, just as he wanted, as courageous and true as he wanted. What was it Tarek had said about his never failing? He had failed, and he knew it, many times. Perhaps Tarek hadn't noticed, but he had. Yet there was Hawk, whom he had healed, Virgen and Tarek too, and Roth. He had succored Felrine of Lynn, had stood at the brink of death and taunted her father Nithra. Seth Laval was dead, yet not buried. His stepfather's abusive words replayed an endless litany through his head. They'd become a part of him, disguised as old friends. Hear me, Horam breathed within. They are not your friends. Let them go. Galen stared at the jagged blue shard of sky suspended high above his head, a brilliance that he ached so much to grasp. He glimpsed the blur of Pony's wings as the elf fluttered across the cavern. Looking past the flying wizard and the mountain's shattered rim, gazing high beyond it all to the clouds, he felt Horam mentally spreading his arms, yearning to go home. Horam's senses uncovered the scattered black robes, the fleeing followers of Malian strewn dead near the surface where Pony had left them. He found the scores of magic-warped victims Pony left untouched, Veelermen huddled starved and abandoned in their pens below the dungeon. With a flex of power and a single thought, he brought them to wholeness again, men and women freed at last from Malian's harm. Cavan Roth, lying dead beside the shattered pool, restored. Galen watched his young shoulders shaking with coughs as he snatched his first breaths. The massive boulder rose from Morant Virgen. Galen clenched the skystone in his hand and witnessed Horam revive him too, saw the captain stagger to his feet, slapping dust from his leggings and cuirass. There was Felrine of Lynn's cut forehead and the sealing of her wound, Tarek's leg as Galen sensed Pony lowering the commander gently onto the tilted stone near where he lay. He heard Tarek's startled shout as, with a flex of effort, Horam knitted his shattered knee. "Now you," Horam whispered through his mind, and Galen surrendered himself to the warder pressing soft and persistent against his heart. Ice spread through his body. He shivered, felt surge after surge of itchy coolness across his flesh. Something firm pressed against his teeth. With it came the taste of blood, the lingering smell of sulfur in his nostrils. He blinked once painfully, his new lids sliding over eyes that felt like sandpaper. Burning tears blotted out his vision, yet he saw through their haze Tarek crouching by his side, gently covering him with something soft. A blanket. Fingers stroked his scalp, With water-heightened nerves, Galen felt his hair pushing through his reformed skin, growing swiftly. "Tarek!" Cameron's voice called excitedly far above. "It's Kevin! And Captain Björgen! They're here! They're alive!" Galen. Smiling softly, Tarek gazed down. Galen felt his spine arching back, his bare heels thumping the stone as his new scalp scraped it painfully. "Ow!" he cried as cramps in his legs knifed through him. Deep within his muscles he felt his bones elongating. All over his body, his arms, his legs, he was growing. "Just a nudge," Halram whispered. "You shall be now what you should have been had you been properly cared for." Galen closed his eyes, relief flooding through him that he finally could. Tears streamed his face. A dream, it had to be. Himself wielding a sword, riding a horse like Tarek's, striding bold and courageous beside other men. No longer a weakling to be pitied and coddled and protected like the child he never got to be. "It was never size holding you back," Halram told him. "You had it in you always to be what you want." With a gasp, Galen roused himself fully and tried to sit up. Hands quickly pressed him flat, preventing him from throwing off his blanket. "Wait," Tarek told him, laughing. "There are ladies present." Galen rolled his head sideways, saw his friend squatting beside him, the commander's hazel eyes flicking a glance upward. "Dren and Roth are fetching our packs," Tarek told him. "You do have more clothing, I hope." "Yes." Galen nodded, grinning to hear his own voice. Slowly he lifted his arms, marveling at their shape under the new, smooth skin, the firmness of muscle he never had before. In vain he groped with his fingers at his belly, where the knot of his scar from Nithra's knife had been. With wondering eyes he stared at Tarek. "Malion's gone," Tarek said, his tone filled with wonder as slowly he shook his head. "How did you and the giant manage it, Galen? We weren't here. Can you tell?" A breathy slapping of wings cut him off. Squinting, Galen looked upward at the glimpse of sky as Pony descended, his lean arms gripping Lieutenant Roth. Galen smiled at the young man's tight-lipped look of fear. "Everyone's down now except Cameron," Farina said behind Galen. With careful steps, she shifted into his view, moving to Tarek's side. Galen watched Tarek's expression soften, saw his friend rise gingerly on his newly healed leg, and with his arm draw Farina close. He didn't want to burden Pony with his size, Farina told them all, her gaze on Tarek's face. He wanted to climb down by himself. "He's bringing our packs." Galen smiled as Tarek gently squeezed Farina's waist with his arm. Something else was healed too, he realized, turning his head. Briefly he glanced down at the river's frothy current swishing by, his smile stretching the new skin on his face. There really is magic in humans too, he thought. "He's trying out his body," Pony explained as he landed and released Roth. Glancing over, Galen saw the winged elf ped softly to Abelar's side where she stood at the cliff's base. Slowly she nodded, peering up. "Gavorian's sword," Abelar said without preamble, flicking her blue gaze down at the elf. "The black sword we giants call Nightbringer. Now do you believe, Pony, that it spoke to me? It came here too, did it not? It led us to the river, Galen and I, to the one natural thing in the world that could slay Malion." As Galen watched, she turned her head, scanning the rocky bank at her feet in search of the legendary weapon, a sliver of translucent red crystal. It was a sword he had only glimpsed flipping through the air, spinning through the water. Now it lay still as if dead, its color a midnight black with a throbbing inner crimson. "It calls to me still," Avalar said softly above him. I hear. Slowly she shook her head, her blonde hair shifting loose across her shoulders. It wants something. Nodding at Tarek's concern, at Felrina resting her head on Tarek's shoulder, Galen levered himself to a sitting position, using his hands to tuck the tattered blanket behind him. Then he looked toward Pony, feeling Halram's control again take his throat. It would seem that, Halram said sadly to them all, I am still here. Slowly Pony crouched at his side, violet eyes staring straight into him. That is a problem, he agreed. So intent were we on getting rid of Malian, we never considered. In your pocket, Galen heard Halram saying softly with his mouth. I sense you brought it with you, my means for escape. Was this Sephram's idea? Come, bring it out for them to see. Galen watched Pony's incomprehension. Puzzled, the elf mage looked down at himself, patted his tunic's many pockets with his hands. Then he stopped. Lifting his head, he stared past Galen into space as the others gathered around him. Slowly his lean fingers delved deep into the pocket over his breast. He drew out a little round stone. This is from my world, he whispered, staring at Galen. A young human in my care brought this out from hiding by mistake. It is not meant for you. Without thought, Galen reached out his hand. Again, Halram controlled his flesh. He watched his warder-strengthened fingers pry the little stone from Pony's reluctant grasp, watched as at once the smooth gem flickered bright. Time crystals, Pony explained, his complexion gone pale with fear. This is a wild and dangerous magic, Halram. Hard to wield, even for me. This is not for you. I throw it down, Halram breathed, and Galen sensed the warder sifting through Pony's thoughts. The power releases when it shatters, one flash, and I ride its fire. Galen felt his head lift. Again he met the winged elf's gaze. White lightning, he breathed. So beautiful. Will it take me home? Pony nodded. Grimly he glanced up. Galen watched him scan the faces of his friends. Not just you, Pony said. With impatient fingers he tucked his glistening white hair behind the arc of his trembling feathers. Galen, too, would meet that fire, and the icy void you call home. He would die. Galen glanced toward the giant as she knelt down to his right, her strong fingers wrapping tight around the hilt of Gavorian's sword. The look on her face spoke as loudly as a curse. This time she would not let it go. It is calling me still, she explained, seeing his expression. I know not why. He nodded as she stood in her damp, disheveled clothing, then peered again at the elf crouched by his side. It doesn't matter, he told Pony, freed by his warder to speak his own mind. I've made it count. I've seen my own worth. That's enough, he said. I can. Trembling, he turned his gaze to the glistening stone beside him, unable to meet Tarek's sharp concern glaring down. Let it go. You will not let it go, Tarek said roughly. Swallowing hard, Galen glanced down as through the river's swirling water Cameron appeared. The collection of scattered stones from the great cavern ceiling created an unstable jumble for the newborn giant to climb. Unfamiliar still with his oversized body, Cameron had taken to the river instead, its receding depths barely reaching his knees. At his look, the giant nodded. Slowly he sloshed, dripping from the water, and onto the rocky bank to meet them, their bedraggled packs still clenched in his massive hand. His pack! Galen saw it with a surge of relief. Reaching up, he accepted his single possession from the giant, its familiar leather feel and weight giving him comfort. Without pause, and under the blanket's shifting concealment, he began quickly to dress himself in the rags he'd worn on Mount Deshea, the very same stained, ragged tunic he was clad in when he had murdered Seth Laval. The activity served to distract him from the chill awareness creeping down his spine. Death was coming, yet now he found he did not fear it. All along he had felt its advance through his flesh, but facing it now, at least he had what few ever did, the knowledge his end would save the world. "You won't," Tarek said again above his head, and now his voice cracked with authority. "Galen, no!" At last he raised his gaze to Tarek's face. "How long do you think Horam could last on our world without harming it?" he asked softly. "I'm sorry, Tarek." Slowly he stood and let the blanket fall. Gathering his courage, he looked into the faces of his friends and tried to smile. In his chest he felt Horam tensing up, heard the warder whisper deep within himself. "Galen, no," Horam said. "There must be another." Without a conscious thought, like an observer from far away, Galen watched his own hand rise quickly and fall, saw the blinding white explosion as the time crystal struck the stone, caught fast at the heart of a spangled, whirling kaleidoscope. He glimpsed 1,000 places and times all at once, with the blanket of stars high above snatching him upward. From the shrinking mouth of the ruined Mount Chestnut, far below his kicking feet, came Avalar's shrill screaming. Somehow he saw it without sight or human understanding as Avalar too winked out.